And in the beginning, I was just a young artist, you know, a young man that went away from Spain. And I started as an artist working, making just very normal in Germany, an apprenticeship. And I went to a technical school. From the very beginning, it was clear that whatever I would do, it would always be directed towards the matter which is relevant in my life, which is that I wanted violence to stop. And at the age of 24, I won a competition for a public monument in Germany, which is called the Elan. So the theme of the sculpture was emancipation. So what I wanted to explain is how this very abstract concept goes through materia actually, and what it means for the human brain. That sculpture worked, and it worked very well. It caused social trouble. The sculpture is sitting in a public monument in Germany, which is an administrative central for all the northwest German banks. And 20 million accounts are being run in that building by 1,500 state officers, state employees. So they were like soldiers, and soldiers are not supposed to strike. And what happened is that, in fact, when the sculpture came into the building, and those 1,500 civil servants started discussing emancipation, and they made a spontaneous strike. That was some kind of catastrophe that, you know, I hadn't counted on. A few hours later, I had from the ministry, from the German ministry, which was responsible for that building, then visit. And they were pretty angry at me. The state called sociologists and literature professors into the building, and those scientists started talking to my 1,500 rebellious civil servants. Everything can be emancipated. So they started discussing the issues at depth. If I'm able in the first place to create such a move, then I should also be able to understand what it means and why it makes people react. Right. So I decided straight away to study sociology. But as I was still focused on the matter of violence, and I had very clearly designed the sculpture in a way so that everybody understood that what I meant was emancipation from violence. And in fact, going even further and even deeper, within those 1,500 civil servants, there were enough persons who had been victims of violence, like rape victims, who stood up and supported me, my sculpture, and the cause within the 1,500 employees that were there. So I could see that people were standing up because they thought that I was helping them. Then I decided to take that very seriously, to make it my responsibility, and to go into university and focus on the power of art to change patterns in society, and the power of art in changing those patterns that hurt most. In the Sorbonne in Paris, then I would have a phenomenon, which is that when I would start talking about violence, about rape, about sexual abuse of children, all the women would come close and all the men would stand up and run out of the room. In Germany, I would have people who would start at me and would be aggressive. In Spain, I had an attitude which was wonderful. I did it in Spain at the university in Barcelona, and I did it at the University of La Laguna in Tenerife.
Yes, but how come in Spain you think it's different? Because the culture is different?
The point is that in Spain, culture is leaning on matriarchy very strongly. Clearer than in other cultures that the gender balance has to be a real balance. Cultural differences are extremely relevant to the matter, to the subject that is being studied. And as I saw that Germany had a much bigger problem than Spain, I decided to go and do the studies in Germany. There was one sociologist who was very interested in the University of Wuppertal, and he wanted me to come across and to do it with him there. And I saw it was too easy. Then I went to the University of Osnabrück, and there I found support on one side, but reticence on the other. And that was interesting. There was the University of Bochum, where I would have very normal people. And I would have radical feminists. Because if any person capitalizes on victims, then that person has lost a battle with me. In the end, I had a group of research which was built up by 7 male professors and about 40 students who would work with me for months, for weeks, for whole days as group on the subject. How do you make so that they become cooperative and that they work? Well, the first issue to solve is that you take it as a very normal problem. The first thing you say, look, to me this is like an illness. There are enough studies being done about cancer and about the social dimension of cancer. And the first thing that always gets done is to calculate the cost. So in the end you need to count the money. You need to say, okay, a cancer patient costs that much. Oh, it's too expensive. And I started calculating the cost of one single victim of rape. And it turned out that one single victim in average costs 750,000 euro. And that the minimum cost for the German country regarding the amount of victims that were out there and just regarding one single type of violence would be 60 billion euro. They all said, wow, there we have a theme. The president of the university asked journalists and TV to come in to announce that my group of research was going to do the first research in Europe about the cost of sexual violence so that it could be normalized and worked at as a theme, as a normal theme. At that time, some scientists in Canada heard about me. And they said, Andrés, what you're doing is interesting. Very interesting story. Why don't you come to Calgary and teach a little bit there? What I had to teach was the social connection between the artwork that the art students were producing and society. But very quickly, in Calgary, at university, every student knew that I had been called in because I was an expert regarding rape. Canadian government officers somehow got involved. I did a couple of big conferences that I met through other professors, a woman called Mary Valentich. And the Canadians were then the first in the world producing the figures, the numbers, for the cost of sexual violence within the Canadian system. They had, for example, patients that had cost to the system round about 10 million Canadian dollar before the real cause for all the illnesses and all the pain, which was a child abuse during childhood, a sexual abuse that the person had endured, was discovered and treated. The actual therapy for the sexual abuse did cost 40,000 Canadian dollar. But the system had been spending $10 million before because nobody knew what this woman had. So if they had known why this woman was suffering from the beginning, they would have saved $9,960,000. It was clear that this obviously could only be a starting point, that a real research had to be done. And what was clear to me also is that it was no point in just studying the sexual violence, because what I felt and what I saw is that every single form of violence is connected. And the main issue I learned and discovered through system theory studies about violence is that violence itself, even though it had never been described ever before by any system theory scientist in the whole planet, yeah, in this way, I discovered and understood that violence is an autonomous, autopoietic, that's what it's called, system. And the more they contradict, the more efficient is a system. You have to look in a very rational, in a very illogical way on reality, because you have to understand what you see from an emancipated point of view. And this emancipation has to go into depth, because you have to let go all the prejudices and all the preconceived opinions. You have to really drop them. And once you see then moves emerging and you see all those dichotomies, all those binomes, that's what they're called, of really contrasting realities, and then you understand that this system is operative on all the planet, regardless of cultural factors. That you see that, for example, rape victims act the same in the United States, in France, in Spain, in Germany. It doesn't matter where the rape happens, it produces exactly the same kind of behaviors. And you discover in the end that the system of violence is something vital. And that all those different violences are linked, because why is it that when a tsunami comes and it kills 500,000 people, immediately after, all the other forms of violence like domestic violence, rape, pillage, robbery, bribery, all of those violence jump up 300, 400%. There is a biological level to violence that is connected to the state of the victim and that needs to be solved. And there is a cultural link that allows that those violences explode and grow, because there is no countermeasures, there is no system to stop them doing so.